Hello, welcome to the Sports Philanthropy Podcast. This is your host, Roy Kessel, and this week we are very excited to have with us Ceil Folz. Ceil, welcome to the show.
Hi, Roy. Thanks so much.
We're excited that you're here with us today to share all of the great work that you do with CFC. So before you get started on that process, on that part of getting everything going, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and tell us how you got into this space?
Okay. Well, I grew up in the Midwest in a suburb of Chicago. I had 8 brothers and sisters. All of us were pretty active in sports. And I was a gymnast growing up. Then I went to college at the University of Wisconsin La Crosse, which is almost only filled with people who are in sports. It's really quite an athletic little group. I got a very difficult degree in recreation. My dad used to ask me how underwater basket weaving was going, but it was, for me, kind of a great path. And I decided to move out to Vail, Colorado. I wasn't even a skier, so that seems like a crazy decision now. And pretty much right away, I went to work for the Vail Recreation Department. And through that, I volunteered for an organization called the Vail Valley Foundation. It's a nonprofit whose focus is on athletics, education, and arts. And I was there for 25 years, the last 16 of those as its CEO. And in that time, I ran 3 different World Alpine Ski Championships, 2 mountain bike world championships. We had the Teva Mountain Games, which is actually quite well known, along with all the different arts. We had 2 performing arts venues. It's really a unique organization. Then I left there in the fall of 2015. And I started my own organization. And my first client was the U.S. Olympic Committee. And from there, I had others. And then about 2.5 years ago, I really thought instead of focusing on larger organizations, there was a real need to be looking at smaller nonprofits and foundations who didn't necessarily have huge staffs, but could really use expertise in all those areas. So I pulled together a team that had worked for me at the foundation mostly. And from there, we created CFC Collective, which is a subsidiary of my primary consulting business. But the collective has really taken off with, we have multiple clients in other areas, but we do find that our work in sports and with athlete foundations is really a space that we have a good foothold in and that we're expanding into. That was a long intro, Roy.
Well, you've done a lot of great things, so I want to back you up for a minute here and go through some of those in a little bit more detail. But I think you hit on many of the spots. So you said you grew up in suburban Chicago. That's where we're based. And so what area was that?
Libertyville, Illinois, greatest small town in the world.
Right around the corner from Vernon Hills up here. So
exactly.
Very close. And as a Wisconsin native and alum, it's interesting to hear your comments about La Crosse because obviously there's a lot of people that go there. And as you went through that recreation program, that's quite a change going from Libertyville to Vail, right?
Yeah. Quite a big change.
So as you started working with the Vail Valley Foundation, tell us about what drew you to that type of work at the outset.
Well, so Vail is a very interesting community anyway. It's a ski resort. I think most people know of it. It's really quite small, but what they had done very early on is they had this big idea just to bring world-class arts and athletics there. And obviously in the ski business, it made a lot of sense to be doing ski races. And so when I first started, President Ford was one of the founders of the Vail Valley Foundation, and he ran a celebrity ski race, and I volunteered to help with that. And once you volunteer in any organization probably, but certainly true of the Vail Valley Foundation, you find that it gets into your heart pretty quick. And in particular for me with the Vail Valley Foundation, they were almost always either pursuing or running a world championships in some sport. So as somebody who loves sports, it made a lot of sense for me to move on into there when they asked me to come join their team. And never regret that for a second. It was great.
So you talked about being there for quite a long period of time. So obviously the road, I think you said when you left, you were the CEO of the foundation. So that's a big step up from where you started as a volunteer. So talk us through kind of how that progress came and what other roles you served in the foundation? We have a lot of people in the network that are working in different capacities, and I think it's always useful for them to get an understanding on what opportunities are there, what types of steps are there for them to take as they grow into those careers.
For sure. And I get that quite a bit as well. I always think I used to tell all of our volunteers, and the foundation on any given year would have 2,000 to 3,000 people volunteer for it. So I would always tell them, I get it. I know how you feel. But I was able to say that of almost every role at the foundation, because when I started, there were 12 employees. And my job was really in sponsorship sales, which I had never done, and in the operations of the event, which is really what I had been doing prior to that at the recreation department, but not on a national or international stage. So in my first years, I was really a program manager. I ran the ski races, helped organize them, but it was small, right? I would do the venue setup, and have all those vendors, and at the same time get the sponsorships done. And as we grew, in my first year there, we had a World Mountain Bike Championships in '94, and I was pretty involved in that. And then from there, we were bidding for the 1999 World Championships. And I found that I had a good, probably mix in personality to be able to work internationally. And so when you're bidding for something, whether it's the Olympics or World Championships, a lot of that is about relationship management, developing relationships, appreciating other countries and the qualities that they have. And I excelled at that, but I also really enjoyed it. And so not only was I able to, have the feet on the ground of the organization, which I also love that, but I really liked the international aspect of what we were doing. And so for me, it just, when you're doing what you like, I think you tend to do a good job of it. And I was fortunate that the foundation had a lot of what I liked. And then when we finished the 1999 championships, and I had been the vice president of operations at that point, which really meant in operations, that's our event side. So, but the Vail Valley Foundation has all these other sides, right? We had a whole development team of, at the time, it was maybe 3 people who raised money from individuals. We had an arts team and education. And after the 99 championships, the CEO at the time, John Garnsey, left to become the president of Vail Resorts, which is the ski operating organization or company. And I was tagged to take his role, but I was not equipped for it. I had been so much on the sports side of it that I had spent no time in fundraising or individual donors. And that took me a little while to figure that out. I would always use the words that you use in sponsorship sales, right? Oh, I sold this. Or when you're pitching a sponsorship, and in donors, it's very different. It's a whole different language. And it took me a little while, but thankfully I had an amazing board of directors, very powerful, but they were also very strong mentors for me. And they really helped me along the way learn the development side, the fundraising side. And through that, 16 years later, the foundation went from being 4 million when I became the CEO. When I left, we were at 25 million a year annual operating. So we had a really great growth spurt during my time as CEO. We expanded our education. We actually acquired one of our performing arts venues. We actually did a lot of acquiring when I was there. So so the path really, what I learned is that you always get your hands dirty. I think the leaders who do those things, they understand more what their team is going through. I think it makes you a little bit more compassionate, but also understanding what the obstacles are along the way to be able to see success.
You described a lot of different roles there as you went through that, and it's interesting because people come into the nonprofit world or the sports philanthropy world in a lot of different ways, and you see people coming in with different sets of expectations of what it really means, of different skill levels, both in terms of fundraising. And what I find is typical is that there's a lot of people who come into this space thinking it's all about events, right? It's all about somebody running the charity golf outing or the gala, and that's really the only thing that they know about philanthropy or sports philanthropy. And so it's challenging to get them on board with everything else that goes on. And you described so many different roles and the size of the staff of everything that you said there were 12 when you started, right at the $4 million number. What did that grow to by the time you got to 16 million?
Well, so when the year I left, we had run the 2015 World Alpine Ski Championships. That event in and of itself was a $60 million event that we raised the money both corporately and individually. And on top of that, I was running the Vail Valley Foundation, which was another 25 million. The foundation staff itself was up to 65 people. And then we had added about 30 more people for the execution of the World Championships. So all in, by March of 2015, we had 95 employees, but probably our resting heart rate of employees would have been closer to 65 without a big World Championships.
Yeah, and that's obviously a significant growth, as you said, from when you took over with 12 people, and just the whole process of managing that size organization is difficult. So as the Vail Valley Foundation was expanding all of these events, what other, you raised the money, talk to us a little bit about the 16 million and how much of that money was used, let's say operationally. Did Vail Valley give out grants itself to other groups?
Yeah, so the Vail Valley Foundation, and again, its annual operating is 25 million. It elevates when you have a major international event. But of that, the initial, when the foundation started, giving grants was a big piece of that. But it really became far more of an operational organization. So we owned 2 performing arts venues, but we ran them. We programmed them, right? We created a dance festival. It's one of the best in the country. So a lot of the 25 million annual operating would go into the buckets of the work that we did. So if we look at that, take the dance festival has its own budget within that 25 million, and we would raise specifically for people who cared about dance. We would raise generally for the Vail Valley Foundation via a couple large programs. One was called Friends of Vail, and that's a commitment of $35,000 a year with a 5-year commitment. That core of donors, we capped it at 50, which is also a great tip, by the way. When you're dealing with a high net worth individual, having caps and clubs is very strong and compelling for that audience. But those individuals, their funding was really the base of support to go against the general operating of the foundation, which is always the hardest thing for any organization to cover, is just your G&A costs. And then we raised on top of that always more specifically for the programs that we were doing. If it was education, we really looked to individuals who care about education. So for us, we were pretty good about, I used to tease that when I was going to a lunch with a prospective donor, it was like one of those people who has a raincoat and they open up, they're like, what do you care about today? Education, arts, and sports? I got it for you. And so that was the beauty of the Vail Valley Foundation, is there's almost something for everybody to care about.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at, you talked about having the different caps on how many people could be at different donor levels or the clubs. It goes back to that concept of exclusivity that everybody wants when they want their name recognition, they want access to athletes, they want access to events. And the more that you can create an environment where they feel that they're getting something special, it's not just that somebody walking in off the street can get it. And the challenge, I think, especially with something like you're describing with the Vail Valley Foundation, is you need to be working with the entire community. So you can't have it completely blocked out to the community, but how do you still create that sense of community with the people that are giving you the big ticket items? And the fundraising, as you said, when you started, that was not an area that you'd had a lot of direct experience on from, you'd done the sponsorship side, but not the donor side. So how did you get yourself up to speed in those areas?
I understood the things that crossed over from sponsorships to donors, and there's several of them, right? The language is completely different, and the valuation of why somebody gives you money is different as well, but not always completely. But I think the core piece of that in sponsorship is the same in donor, which is relationships. You can have a company that is perfectly fit for what you want, what you're doing, that the benefits associated with that sponsorship would match up to what they usually care about. But if there's not exactly that click for that sponsor, whether it's with the individual who's working with them or with the entity that they're thinking about supporting, it just won't happen. So you have to be able to have a relationship and have your organization be one that values relationships first. And that crosses over into donors. There's a lot of very wealthy, very generous people in the world, and they give to a lot of things, but they don't give to everything. They give to the things that touch their heart and to the people who get into their heads and their heart. And so once I understood that was a similarity, I could figure it out for myself of how to really value in what the outcomes a donor cares about. And this is something that even for sports organizations, you have to be able to value. You have to do something, right? You can't say we're save the whales and not save a whale. So the more you can understand what your organization does, what it's achieved, what it's been able to do, that those things resonates for donors too. And that's not that much different from a sponsor, right? How many eyeballs will see my ad or my banner or whatever it is. So just understanding in that way how you cross over from what a sponsor needs to what an individual needs. You just think of it in the ways that they think of it.
You raised some great points there, which is valuing the outcomes that the donor cares about and looking at that. And one of the best people that's ever done solicitation training that I've been part of, one of his core comments was, what the eyes don't see, the heart won't feel. And
Right.
and it's so important to get people out to the events that they're supporting and to the organizations that they're working with, because it's really hard, especially in today's world where we've got so much information in front of us, right? In terms of video, in terms of audio, all kinds of things that are out there. It used to be that people would send out a postcard or a mailing or a letter, and they would put in a picture of, right, somebody, a child in Africa, for example, that needed food, and that was supposed to tug at your heartstrings because you would see a photo. But in today's world, that's rarely sufficient. So as you're raising money, for the different causes, tell us about how you felt you were able to best establish that relationship with the donors.
We were fortunate at the foundation, and with our client base now, we take the same probably learning for them. But at the foundation, we had this opportunity where our donors came from all over the country, all over the world, actually. And again, a lot of high net worth individuals who ran major companies, a lot of team owners. And we were able to do those because we were a programmatic organization, because we did things. Every donor had access to come to performances at the amphitheater or come to the World Cup ski races. We wanted them to come and see what we did. We wanted them to build relationships with our team and with athletes or musicians or dancers. All of those things, the more, to your point, that you can give a hands-on opportunity for them to see and feel that. One of our programs is called Magic Bus, and it's literally like a ice cream truck of learning that we drive to our poorer communities. And when the Magic Bus pulls up, parents with their little kids come running out, and the teachers on board have books and they're reading with the parents and the kids. And we would put our donors on that all day long, because the minute you saw the Magic Bus and it pulled into a trailer park and those parents and those kids came out as if it was the highlight of their week, what's not to want to support that? So we would say, whenever possible, to have your prospective donors or donors, make sure they stay in touch with you. We have a client now, USA Bobsled, and one of our objectives for that is for people to care about bobsled. You've never done it. You've probably never seen it. So that's actually a challenge for us, is how do we get people around the country to care about what these guys do, because they're amazing. And what we have heard is from everybody who's ever done a partner ride on one of the 2 tracks in the US, they come back saying, this is my sport. I love this sport. These people are amazing. So our goal is to build relationships with people who have done it, to have the athletes do video newsletters instead of a written newsletter, so that you see their face, you get to know their personality. I think those are opportunities that we look for our clients today. Those are things I learned about when I was at the foundation firsthand.
Well, I think those are great examples when you talk about somebody going on a bobsled run that's never been able to do that. It's an amazing experience. And I think that that's true in virtually every sport. If you haven't played it or seen what the athletes do at the highest level as they're preparing for things in training, you don't understand what they go through on a daily basis. People, golf is one of the easiest examples because everybody can go out and play a golf course. In many cases, you can go play the same courses that the tour is played on, and people will go and I parred that hole, and PGA player bogeyed or double bogeyed. Well, obviously you're not playing in the same conditions, you're not playing under the same pressure, but most importantly, when you go and look at what they do, they're not just going out on the course for 4 or 5 hours, depending on how slow the play is these days, but they're going to be out there. You look at how many balls they hit every day. You look at how many putts they hit every day. You look at all of the other strength and conditioning work that they go through, the nutrition, the whole process of what people often fail to recognize how dedicated all of these professionals are. And that's why they're professionals. They've got to that level because they not only have the innate talent, but they've got the work ethic and the drive to make sure that they are successful. And it's interesting because as you described everything in the growth of the work that you did at the Vail Valley Foundation and then for CFC now, you put in all of those same type of hours developing the skill set that you needed to go from being uh, a volunteer at the Vail Valley Foundation to running the show, right? That's a big growth, and you spent a lot of time in that. So tell us now, as you took all of that experience and stepped away and looked at CFC, what made you want to start your own initiative and you do that instead of remaining in that type of position?
Well, I'd been at, the foundation for a long time, and you can feel when you're at an organization for a long time and you have a really healthy staff that is also ambitious, you kind of feel like it's time for new leadership. And for sure, for me, it was, but it was also, I always tell the story, my dad was dying and I wanted to spend some time with him. And I think by far the best decision I ever made was to do that in his last months. But when that was happening, I had been fortunate that at the time, the CEO of the U.S. Olympic Committee, Scott Blackman, had been reaching out to me saying, when you're ready, talk to us. And they became one of my first clients when I was ready. I also had another fantastic first client, was KSL, who owns a lot of ski resorts. The two gentlemen who are the principals of that company had been on my board. I was very fortunate to have amazing connections that I had developed through my work at the Vail Valley Foundation, and those just transitioned me very quickly into consulting with pretty large organizations. But in the midst of that, as I was going on that, and I didn't think that was where I'd land, I just thought that was, kind of a space holder, which I think happens for a lot of people who leave a job after a long time. They go into consulting to kind of figure out where they want to go next. And one of my clients had asked me to pro bono with a small nonprofit. And I sat down with their board and listened to them, and I gave them a couple of suggestions. And 2 months later, the chairman of that board called. He said, we did 2 of the things you told us to do, and we've doubled our revenues. And I was like, oh, that's so gratifying. That never happens. Seldom when you're a consultant does your client take all of your advice, or sometimes any of it. But I also felt that there was a need then for these smaller nonprofits who they don't have a grant writer and a fundraiser and a fundraising event person and even an executive director half the time. And they're still doing great work. That's where a lot of the greatest work comes from, is from smaller organizations. So the collective was really born with that idea in mind. We took on any nonprofit because we felt that the basics of being a well-run foundation are the same, regardless of if you're saving a whale or running, free football for, elementary school kids. Essentially, the basics are the same, which is true. But where we've found over time where we've probably enjoyed our time more or done a better job and had even greater success has been when we put our focus into athlete-based foundations, regardless of what they do, because they all have different missions, or sports foundations, probably because so many of us come from that background. So we have clients in myriad skills. One of our first clients was a horse rescue. But we focus a little bit more on the athletes and the sports side of stuff.
So going back to the consulting work that you were doing when you first went out, was that in the nonprofit type of space in terms of helping these larger USOC type of clients, or were you doing other type of consulting work for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was a little bit of both. And it was, I was even a little torn too, because my background had been so big on events, event execution. I'd worked a lot with other Olympics, World Championships. So I'd played on a very high international stage, and I certainly could have transitioned probably into that space. But I had also kind of always loved the idea of figuring out how people raise money. I see it as a challenge, right? To me, that's a competition as well. And so one of my clients, the USOC, I was working with their foundation, helping them. KSL, I was helping their ski resorts and some of their implementation and execution and creating of events. So I do love both of those spaces. I still have clients in both of those in my consulting business. But we have found that there's kind of, you always want to go where there's a great need. And there's a pretty big need in helping foundations, period, figuring out who they are. I always use the saying, it doesn't even make sense, but I use it all the time. There's a monkey for every tree. And we tell our clients that all the time. Everybody always wants to go to the same people. If you live in any community, you look around, you say, who are the wealthy people? Let's try to get money from them. I'm not a huge fan of that. I'm a huge fan of finding about who's going to care about what you do, right? Whether it's a sport or some other initiative, find those people who are already going to have a penchant to be likely to care about what you do rather than just that they have money. Because first off, in today's world, you actually don't know who has money and who doesn't. It's a hard thing to actually figure out sometimes. But you also don't know who wants to give you that money and who wants to support those efforts. That's the more important piece.
It's definitely challenging. And you talk about the people that have the money, which are easy for individuals to identify. You just look around communities and you can see whose names are on buildings, whose names are in the program of many of the larger philanthropies in a particular community. It's easy to find those people. But most of those individuals have developed and evolved a relationship with those organizations over a long period of time. Those are not the types of relationships that are born out of cold emails or typically out of random cold call types of environments. And you can only imagine if their name is on all of those materials, how many people are trying to get in front of them to make their pitch. And I know that that's always challenging. I have people coming to me all the time about an introduction to somebody who has a lot of money or somebody who's given a gift to other causes. Well, can't you get me in front of them? And can't you get me in front of this next person? And it's like, I can, but I don't think it's going to help you, because what you're doing, although you're doing amazing work and you're doing terrific things in your community in that aspect, like you said, if somebody's not interested in skiing, if somebody's not interested in poetry, if somebody's not interested in what your organization is doing, it could happen, but it's usually much more difficult to get in that door. And so as you consult with these smaller nonprofits, where do you start with them? Because as you said, they don't have a director of development. They may not have an executive director. They've got a board that is frequently composed of the founders' friends and who they were able to pull together to get something off the ground. How do you even start that evaluation process?
There are a couple of things. The collective, so the team that works with smaller nonprofits, it's a team. And so our whole concept is not even that we come and consult. It's that we start with that. We come in, we've got some ideas, we listen to you, we listen to where you want to go. We write up a plan to do that. And then we sit down and we do the work with you. So my team actually is very hands-on. So if there's an event that we are helping them with or we believe they should do, my team very much so is doing part of the work of getting that event going with the client. But where we start, so we really focus our work in a couple areas. The first one is board and board development. To me, that's the single most essential one, which is, if you don't have the right board in place, which lots of organizations don't, you're going to struggle. In gymnastics, a coach, because that's my background, you would always, my coach once took my head and kind of dragged it around in a very gentle way. The mat, and just said, where the head goes, the body goes. And that's true of almost every sport, right? Where the head goes, the body goes. That's true of every organization. Where your board is going, where they're looking, that's where your organization is going to go. And you have a board that's not looking and isn't planning on going anywhere, doesn't have the capacity to go anywhere, you won't go anywhere. So to me, that's the number one thing. We work on that. We help identify potential board members. A lot of times we have another NGB, another Olympic sport client that their board has really struggled. They couldn't find new board members. We used our network, and when we started telling people this is an Olympic sport, people came out of the woodwork, really great board members. So sometimes you need a little help in that, in identifying some new ones, and they can bring some new blood in as well, but also some experience and some contacts. So board is everything. We also look at mission and messaging, and how you talk about yourself is the next big thing. How you think of yourself even. And then we get down to, brass taxes, which is about revenue streams. We support multiple revenue streams. We're never a fan of any client who comes to us and they have one source of revenue, whether it's they only focus on a fundraising event and that's it, or they only focus on grants. We think that's dangerous. You've really put all your eggs in one basket, and when that basket falls or cracks or something, which it will, you've really put your organization in a challenging situation. So we work with our clients on developing multiple streams, whether it's sponsorships, corporate support, fundraising events, grants. We look at all of those things to have some value into the organization. That's it.
That's a lot. That's definitely an impressive array of work that you're doing with these groups. So when you bring in the collective, as you've been describing it, tell us a little bit more about how that works. Who's part of the collective? How does somebody get to you in the first place?
Yeah, we're easy to get to. All of our clients have been word of mouth, which is great, or it's been through relationships that we have, which is great. So our work with a client, we have one right now. I'll meet with them on Wednesday, but it's a superstar athlete, which we're excited about. We've already begun doing some due diligence to try to understand what they care about, what they're going to want to do. And once we start that, we'll spend about the first month with a client. If it's an existing foundation or nonprofit, we like to do a lot of research. We'll look at their everything, right? Their past fundraising strategies, who their board is. We talk to everybody. So we call that the discovery period, and we'll talk to board members and stakeholders, all confidential. We think that's essential as well, because lots of times people don't want to say what they're really thinking. And once we hear that and we get a good sense of where we think we can help them get to, we write up a discovery report, and that becomes the roadmap. So in the discovery report, we write up where you are, what your challenges and pitfalls are, where we think you could go, and then we break it into two things. Here's the tactics that we're going to do with you, and there's usually 15 to 25 that are very clear, that are metric based, right? If we say, we're going to, I'll use bobsled because they're such a fun athletes, bobsled and skeleton. We wanted to create a Team Bob program where everybody named Bob should become a supporter of bobsled, and you get a special hat. That was one of our tactics. We've just executed it. So any of your watchers or listeners who are Bobs, go to bobsled and join Team Bob. But then we also set goals. So we work on our tactics throughout the year, and all of the tactics roll up to achieving goals. And that way our client knows what the end of the year should look like, right? Are you going to be up 20% in revenue or donor numbers, or you're going to have 3 new board members? You're going to have brand new, messaging. There's an event execution we think we want to do. We list it all out, because that's also when I consult. What I don't love when I am consulting is if I'm not held accountable to helping make change for my clients. I believe in being there all the way through it, right? Not just having the idea, but then if that idea doesn't work out, I believe in coming up with another idea and working together until there's a solution and we figure it out. That's how the collective works as well.
And it seems like a very powerful process that you go through, and you've got experienced people that are working with you. I'm sure that you get approached by many organizations that would love to work with you, would love to benefit from your expertise and experience. So what does that sort of onboarding process look like? Because you probably don't have the bandwidth to take on every project that either comes to you directly or that somebody refers in and says, hey, we could really use your help with this. So tell us a little bit about sort of the capacity you have and how you go through the process of identifying and selecting those clients.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We really, we're young, we're pretty new also, and so we're hungry. So we like to look at a lot of things, but we also want to make sure that we can be successful for the client. We try not to put ourselves in a spot where we won't be able to be successful for any number of reasons. And so the first thing for us is always just talking. We check them out, we look at everything we can, and then if we think that we can really make a difference for them, then we go to work on that. We look at organizations based on their gross annual revenues, and we price our fees based on that. We come in as a lump sum, so we don't track hours, we track to goals and tactics. So if it takes us longer, it takes us longer. If we had an idea we thought was going to be successful, it wasn't, then we have to come up with another idea. And so it's all of those things are unique, possibly not the best sometimes. Some clients, we are probably paying them to do the work by the time we figure it all out. And we're okay with that because we also believe that we learn along the way too. So we've gotten exponentially better with every new client we bring on and as we execute everything.
Yeah, that's always one of the challenges everybody who works in this space talks to me about is how do we price our service? How do we figure out what people are going to need? Because unfortunately, and intentionally or not, many organizations and clients don't even know exactly what they need when you go in, and you might not be able to even get the right information and the right data in that first part of the process. Sounds like you have an extensive month that you go through that discovery period and put together that report. And certainly that's going to be useful for the client, no matter what they decide to do. But once you start diving into that, you might get halfway in and then realize that the data that you needed to really execute something or to set the right benchmarks is missing or isn't measured very effectively. And so I know that that's got to be a big challenge as you go through that part of the procedure. So when you look at these types of the type of work you're doing now at CFC, what do you see as the challenge for you in working with those clients? Where do the challenges typically come up?
Yeah, that's one of our clients, one of our Olympic sport clients. They had asked me that question when they were becoming a client. They said, who's not a good client for you? And I said, it's not a good client for us if they don't think they have any problems. If they actually think they're doing pretty well right now, they're not going to be a good client for us because anything we suggest, the odds are good. They're just not going to buy off on it because they feel like whatever they're doing is working. So that's the first one. And I'd say the second one is if you have a group that's just completely resistant to change, because, change has to happen. Usually, if you want different outcomes, you're going to have do something differently. And we will always propose that. We are, innovation is one of our number one things. We like to come up with new and fresh ideas, ways to differentiate our clients out of the clutter, because it is cluttered out there in the nonprofit world. But you have to have, a client that's comfortable with that. And that's not always the case. So for us, we really try to suss out that too. If people are willing to go for the ride, and we'll have failures. That's the thing that we tell every single client. We will screw something up or we'll have some idea that doesn't work, we were wrong about. That will happen every single time too. So we try to make sure we have a client who's willing to go for that ride, because if you're not willing to fail, then you'll never try anything new.
And I think that's really important as you look at this and try and evaluate like where the client fits in, because as you said, you've got to try new things. Otherwise it gets stale. Just like you talked about from a leadership perspective with the Vail Valley Foundation, you felt that it was time. You felt that it might be good for the organization to have some new blood and to have somebody different taking that charge. It's one of the things we see often with the board of directors and with different groups like that, in terms of making sure that they implement the proper and best policy types of practices there. But when you talk about that resistance to change, that's a difficult culture, because there's so many aspects that are embedded in that. And where I've seen that come up is where boards have been together for a long time, and there really hasn't been change. There hasn't been that new thought process, hasn't been uh, the opportunity for new voices to come into the room, because then it becomes, well, we've always done it this way. So and I think in the nonprofit space in particular, that's very dangerous, because in the for-profit space, with all of the measurement metrics and things that are out there, it's typically quarter by quarter basis, and if something is not working, you're going to see changes very quickly. In the nonprofit space, sometimes it's hard to tell, especially with major initiatives. It could be a year or two, because if you just have one down year, there could be so many reasons for why that occurred. What area do you find that you get a better result for those two issues you raised, that they think they know everything, or resistance to change? What's your attack? Is that more through the executive director or the staff, or do you tend to have better luck through the board?
I work a lot I do better with boards generally, because a lot of times board members have got a lot of experience with other organizations. So they're used to having outside voices coming in and looking and giving it a clean look. So that becomes easy. But executive directors, that's where things happen. So you need both of those on board. But I find myself using an example of Survivor a lot. If you watch that show, and they build their alliances to be able to make it through. I look at that and I kind of tell my boards that as well, is that sometimes they feel like they're a lone voice. And so you have to, pick one off at a time, and you get one to believe, and then you try to get another one to believe until you've built an alliance that can be making some of those changes and decisions. And so it's pathetic, isn't it, that I use reality television as one of my, consulting methods. But I think it's true. If you can get one, then work on that next one. And it's the same thing in fundraising. We talk about concentric circles all the time. We'll look at a client and they have a very small database, and that doesn't really worry us. We say, let's build in that first base, and then let's work on that next circle. Who do those people know? It's the same way when you're building out a board, right? The first one you bring in, they'll know somebody, you bring somebody else in. So a game.
Well, it is a game. And I think the important thing you identified there is there's always ways to grow. There's always ways to raise more money. And truly, the work that you're doing is so important for many of these organizations that don't have the expertise or the bandwidth to take it all on their own side. And I think one of the challenges many of them have is trying to figure out, how do they get that help? Who do they turn to? So Ceil, I want to thank you for coming on with us today. I think you've given people great insight into the type of work that you do. So if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to touch base?
Yeah, they can just go to our website and just click right in there, and we'll follow right back up on that. And you can either go to Ceil Folz Consulting or CFC Collective. They actually share a site, kind of duplicates over. So yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Roy.
Thank you for coming on with us today. We appreciate your time. This is Roy Kessel signing off for the Sports Philanthropy Podcast. We hope you'll join us next week.